Hi, class. You should be on chapters 4, 5, and 6 this week. It sounds like from what many of you have shared with me that you enjoyed chapters 1, 2, and 3, looking at a broad brush stroke at the Gospels in general. Um, Chapters 4, 5, and 6 deal with the historical setting of Scripture. Now, some of you may be wondering, why is that important? Well, it's very important to understand what was going on during that period of time because it might give you a better sense of the life of Jesus during his ministry, the events going on in the world around him, how he found himself in a culture that was led by the Romans, yet Jewish leadership had tremendous power, which obviously led to the crucifixion, but we'll get there eventually. But again, chapters 4, 5, and 6 do a really, really good job of covering the material, and I don't want to lecture over the same type of stuff, but I do want to hit a couple of big points. Okay, when you think about the Jewish peoples, you know they were annexed, if you will, or taken away by the Persians, and Jerusalem fell in the 6th century BC. Well, eventually the Greeks came and they took over, and finally the Jewish people got back. If you read the book of, for example, Nehemiah and Ezra, they go back and rebuild the city of Jerusalem. But then comes a period which is called the Maccabean period. Now, some Bibles, I think it's primarily like the Catholic Bible, so if you have a Catholic Bible, these books will be in there. There's like 1st and 2nd Maccabeans. It's fascinating reading. What it talks about is the revolt of the Jewish people against the Greek leadership. And what they did was they fought for their independence, and it was bloody and it was terrible. And the Greeks went and defiled the temple by something like throwing a cut up pig or something in there. Of course, as you know, pigs were not something that Jews held in the highest esteem. As you go back and read through the Old Testament, hooved animals were a violation of the eating rules. But anyway, so it was a bloody war, but they won their independence, only to have Rome basically seize them again. And it wasn't until 70 AD, when the fall of Jerusalem and the fall of the temple for the last time um, occurred. Jesus' ministry had gone on from the end of the Maccabean period through the various Herods that ruled the area until Jesus was crucified, and then for another 40 years or so before the fall of Jerusalem in 70 AD. That was the life and times of what you read from the book of Acts on. Paul's letters were probably in the 50s, in the early 50s, 60s maybe. John, the revelation of John was probably the latest. Some people date that as late as 90 AD. But to understand that this time and period was one that was in turmoil, the Middle East, much like it is today, was in a constant state of fear and revolt and anger. Nobody that I know of wants to not have freedom. And the Jewish people were the exact same way. They wanted their freedom. They believed that a new Messiah was coming, that one who would rule the throne just like David would come and would drive the Romans away and set up this new earthly kingdom. And that's why the Jews to this day do not believe in Jesus, because they don't believe that he did what their understanding of a Messiah is. The Davidic rule was going to be this wonderful world where everything was all Jewish again, and they would be a power, that would be to be reckoned with. And Jesus was not that. Jesus was the suffering servant. His was a much bigger battle. It was not for the battle of Jerusalem or Palestine or any of those things. It was the battle for man's soul. So as Jesus came into this world, this earthly world, he was surrounded by threats and turmoils from the very beginning. Now, some scholars will date Jesus' birth more around anywhere from 6 to 3 BC, where still some scholars date it at 0. But because of the calendaring system, for me it doesn't make that big a difference. The fact was he was born during the reign of Herod, and died while Pontius Pilate was the governor, if you will, of Jerusalem. Interesting thing about Herod. Herod was a maniac. He was nuts. He was crazy. I don't know how else to put it. He had his own family members killed because he felt jealous of them or threatened by them. When he died, he had a mandate put in place that the eldest child of every family, I think it's the eldest son of every family, would be put to death so that there would be weeping in the streets. I guess he knew that nobody was going to cry for him. They'd be glad when they got rid of the guy. But he was clearly, I'm not sure if schizophrenic was the right word, but there was something wrong with this guy. He was a megalomaniac. He believed that he was the only king. And as you read through scripture, you realize that he was trying to trick the wise men or the kings who came to look for this Jesus by having them supposedly come back and report about what they found. Well, the wise men were just that. They were wise, and after they visited Jesus, they got the heck out of Dodge and didn't even go back. And of course, we see what Herod did. He had every young child under the age of, I can't recall now, 3 or 6, be put to death. So Herod was certainly a nut. So one thing I want you to do through chapter 4 is not get too bogged down in the things like the Hasmonean dynasty and all of that. It's very interesting reading, and I think it will really help you understand the world of Jesus and the world of the Jewish life, and then ultimately that of Jesus. Some great pictures and maps in here. On page 109 of your textbook has the Herodian dynasty, and it's very interesting. And there's a bunch of Herods in Scripture. One of the Herods got really mad at John the Baptist and had him imprisoned, and ultimately had him beheaded. So there was a bunch of Herods, and to help you understand which Herod is which, I would encourage you to read and look at page 109. I think that'll help you a great deal. Page 117 is another one that I think you want to focus on. It's about Josephus. Josephus was a historian, a Jewish historian, who wrote about much of the battles and the wars and all that was going on during that period of time. But he also makes mention of this Jesus, this one that people call the Messiah and the Christ, and the fact that he was crucified. And that is one of the very few extra canonical, that is outside the Bible, references we have of Jesus. So many people will say, Jesus never lived, he was a figment of the Christian imagination, blah, 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 blah. Yet they're more than willing to believe other things that Josephus wrote, but for some reason they want to deny that. Jesus Christ did live. He's a historical figure. And even some of the more skeptical liberal theologians will at least admit that he was a person who lived. There is very little doubt that Jesus was here. And Josephus, if need be, Josephus backs that up extra canonically. The other things, again, I'm turning through my book, so I'm sorry I have my head down like that. I know that's not the best thing. Chapter 5, I think, will be very interesting to you as well. The religious settings that was going on at the time. It's very, very important for you to understand in this course, before we actually get into the Gospels, what the Jewish structure looked like. And the reason that's going to be so important is that as we look at each Gospel, there may be references to Jewish customs, to the Pharisees, to Sadducees. Many people think they're both religious groups. In fact, they're not. Many Pharisees thought they were doing the best thing. They served as what's the word for it? A vicarious um, leader for the people. In other words, they believed themselves to be the representatives to God, and that in a sense they cleansed the people in which they were in charge of by asking for forgiveness, very much like a priest in today's world would do. Whereas the Sadducees were actually businessmen, they were landowners, but they held a great deal of power as well. And to have the Sadducees and Pharisees kind of combine to get Jesus said a lot, because it said not only was he irritating the religious leaders, he was irritating the non-religious leaders. So for those two diverse groups to join up forces and eventually have Jesus killed says a lot about the life and times of Jesus. Understand, too, the groups within Judaism. And the reason that's important is that even after Christianity, after Christ died and after the book of Acts came along, you'll notice that the followers were not called Christians, not for a while in the book of Acts. I forgot which chapter it is right off the bat where they're first called Christians. I think it's like chapter 15 or 16, I'm not sure. But they were called people of the way. And really, the Christians were thought of nothing more than another sect, S-E-C-T, or another branch of Judaism. That's all most people saw it as. They really didn't see the difference. Unless you were Jewish yourself, you probably didn't really know. If you're just a Gentile out there and you see these guys and they're all talking about Yahweh God, you're probably thinking, oh, I guess they're all about the same. But in fact, there were different branches. Even today, you see in the Jewish life different trends, different groups. Hasidic Jews are the more strict, the more conservative ones. They're the ones you see who are at the Western Wall, often bowing and praying and doing those kinds of things. All the way to people who are Jewish by heritage, that is, they were born in a Jewish family, but for all intents and purposes are atheists. So there are a number of, it's a spectrum that Judaism runs along. So let me make sure that you read through chapter 5. And then 6, I think, is a really interesting chapter. It talks about the social and cultural setting of the Gospels. It's really important to understand how life was during the time of Jesus. It was an agricultural society. It was still family-based, very male-dominated. Women and children held very little value unless you were the firstborn son. Second-born son, daughters, those kinds of things were, they were of value, but not much. If a woman essentially had no place in culture at that point, that's why when Jesus speaks to the woman at the well, that's why when Jesus defends the woman who was caught in adultery, that's why when Paul talks to Lydia by the creek at Philippi, all those things were amazing. Now, to you and I, it's no big deal, but it was absolutely amazing because women were held to nothing more than almost slaves. They just served the purpose of cooking, keeping the family, you know, just basically running the household. They had no value, they had no decision-making power, they had no rights, if you will. A man could simply divorce a woman by saying, I think it was 3 times in that culture, I divorce you, I divorce you, I divorce you, and then the woman's out on her own. She's gone, she's, has to fend for herself. So it's very important to understand that this culture that Jesus is in, and I think what it's going to do is help you understand better the true nature of the radicalness of Jesus. Jesus was not just some, every time I see that one movie, it's around Easter time, and they almost never show it on network TV anymore. It's about the life of Jesus. And of course, the guy's British. They always have to have a British accent for some reason. And he has these like crystal clear blue eyes, and he speaks very gently, and he doesn't barely say anything. But the Jesus that really lived was a Jesus who spoke firmly and against things that were wrong, against the legalism of the Pharisees, about the fact that sinners were kept to the side, when in fact Jesus says, I've come for them. I've come for the sick, not for the well. If in fact, which I believe Joseph was a carpenter, then Jesus would have had to have been a pretty muscular guy to be a carpenter as well. If you think about hammering and building and crafting and doing all of those things, you don't have some wimpy guy who does that. So we're talking about a Jesus who was a man, a strong man with a strong voice. Yes, he was compassionate. Yes, just by a mere single touch, he could heal. By a word, he could heal. All of those things. But don't ever mistake or get in your head that this is some wimpy Jesus, some skinny hippie-looking guy who happens to talk British and have pale blue eyes. We don't know exactly what Jesus looks like, but the Jesus I worship and the Jesus I know is a Jesus as described in the Gospels. And if you put the pieces together, he was in fact a very strong man, probably very stout, and spoke with a great deal of power and force. Also, chapter 6 talks a great deal about clothing and style of that period of time, what kind of foods they ate, what kind of houses they lived in. Now, this is real important to understand, too, about the houses, because when you start looking at the healing of the paralytic, where the four friends lower the man down into where Jesus was speaking, it's important for you to understand how houses were built so that that part makes sense. It was, as I said, an agricultural community, also driven by fishing. Fishing was a big deal then at that point. But as the Romans took over, the word is Hellenized the culture around them. So much of what happened in that period of time was influenced. Speech, for example, though Jesus more than likely spoke Aramaic, which was the language, his native language, he clearly spoke Hebrew and Greek. Any educated person would have spoken multiple languages. Greek was the language of trade and business. Aramaic was Jesus' native tongue. Hebrew, if you were Jewish, you must know Hebrew as well. So, it's important to understand that that's what the culture was like. And I think that's really all I really wanted you to get from chapters 4, 5, and 6. Next week, what we're going to get into is the actual Gospels. And we're going to begin with the Gospel of Mark in chapter 7. And this is where you're going to have a number of lengthy audio recordings that I have, and I may do some additional video ones as well. But this is when we start getting into the heart and soul of the Gospels. But please understand that it's important to understand these first 6 chapters, because without understanding the culture and the history and the rulers and the lifestyle and what it was like, much of what we look at in Mark and Matthew and John and Luke really won't make a lot of sense. They'll just be kind of stories to you. But if you understand this was a real period of time, real people, real history, then I think it will help you a great deal in understanding that. Thanks a lot, and we will be back with you. Thanks.